Hello, welcome to Mark Langley's Horsemanship Podcast, a podcast helping people to understand their horses better, to provide solutions in a calm, connected way. I'm Jenny Barnes.
And I'm Mark Langley.
Mark, we're going to start the questions today for you with some that are on backing up. I've got a question here from Kathleen, who says that sometimes when she asks to back up when she's on the ground, it looks like a horse is pushing from his front feet. And when he does this, each of the 4 foot steps are separate. So they're not together. You know how you're meant to have the diagonal front and back stepping at the same time. She's asking, is this an issue caused by the handler not asking something correctly, or is it something to do with the horse's body? And how do you correct it so that they do step up with that 2-beat diagonal rhythm?
This is, it's, if you watch a lot of soft horses that sort of are very comfortable in a back up, and there's no, because some horses have got a really awkward hindquarter movement and they're sort of thinking left and right or thinking forward. So they fight a lot in the back up, and then you'll get all these sort of squiggly backups where the rhythm is not quite a 2-beat rhythm. And also when you're backing up, the horses have something to lean on a lot of the time. So when they've got a forward thought and they're leaning on that halter, then they're going to be pushing. And some of that pushing is causing them to, get out of rhythm and lean and put their front feet down. And one of the most common, braces that I'm coming across all the time in horses is that, the freeze brace in the front of the chest, where they brace in the base of the neck, and they won't lift their wither and softly come backwards. So, excuse me, it's very important that horses are picking up in the knees and softly backing up. So the backup, to get a good backup, the horse can't be sort of a half asleep. So some horses can do a fairly asleep backup and still get a reasonable rhythm. But so if your horse is relatively shut down or very, very lethargic, sometimes they don't have enough energy to put that life into the backup, and they just kind of trudge back and they make drag marks in the ground and things like that. So what I try and do is I try and have a way of bringing that life up in them. There's a lesson that I do. There's a few ways I go around it. One of the ways, and this way, is to get a bit more lift in the horses before they back up. So I'll stand there with a horse. So it's very common you see people when they teach back up is lower the head, bend the nose in, and then back up. I don't go by that so much. I actually just want the horse to go backwards with its feet and think backwards, and then the head starts to hang in place. So I actually don't encourage the horses to lower their head before they back up. I think some horses get stuck in the front because we've lowered the head and asked them to back up, and they get stuck in a position with the head low, but nothing's ever happened in their wither and they haven't picked their wither up. So there's a lesson, and it's a very slow lesson on a braced horse, where you got to sort of you can put your hands on the knot. You can put 2 hands on the knot if you want, so you can just hold them quietly there. So I put 2 hands on the knot underneath their chin on the halter, and I'll just gently start to lift their head up, just quietly, and you'll feel them starting to push down, especially if it was, say, a horse had been Western trained, they start to push down against you because they've been taught to put their head down. As soon as they feel any contact on their face, they sort of go in this, I guess, mechanical position. So opposed to following the feel up, they'll push down. So when they push down, you kind of set and you firm up a little and say that's not available in the way you're holding your hands. And then when they soften a little, you just soften your hands a little, and then you sort of start to lift again until they can lift quite high, almost like a horse that you wouldn't want them at that height. Now, what you'll get is you'll find those horses with the brace in the base of the neck will get tighter and tighter in the front. And just remember, you've got to be careful and kind of do this in incremental stages. So you might do it, lifting slowly, and then let them off a bit, lift slowly until they can lift up higher. But then the idea is they get into a position that they're a bit uncomfortable, and they've got their head up, and they're like, I don't know what to do. And then you'll find if you stay there, they'll fight a little, and then they'll actually move all 4 feet, and they'll realize that lifting their head up and bracing the front and shutting down in that front's not working. Then they'll start to move their feet. And then you just release, and then you do it again and again. And what you find starts to happen as you lift on that knot, they'll start to lift. But as soon as they start to lift their head, they go, oh, I know. How about I just loosen my feet up? And they'll loosen their feet up, and you'll see all 4 feet loosen. So what you're looking for is all 4 feet to loosen. And when all 4 feet loosen, the horses kind of, and what usually happens is they start to bring their feet a little closer together, so they become equally balanced on each foot, as in they lighten up and they've got equal weight over their hindquarter and their forequarter. Whereas when they were standing, they probably would have had a lot more weight on their forequarter. So when they're standing, they've got all this weight on their forequarter. And if we ask them just to back up straight away, they push those front feet into the ground and they just kind of trudge back, pushing off those front feet. Whereas this lifting lesson, before you ask for direction, you ask for elevation. And the bracy horses, I found it really good, not only in the horses that have been taught to bury and they've got so buried in the front end that they don't lift up, but also for the horses that are potential rearers that have got used to putting their head up and getting this really stuck freeze brace. This lifting really helps them get out of that. So you lift, and then all of a sudden the horse starts to wriggle loose, and then you reward them, and then they wriggle loose again. And then after a while, you just put a little lift on their head, and they'll start to wriggle loose. And when they wriggle loose and you see them sort of stand equally balanced, that's when you start to direct that knot backwards and say, back up a little bit now. And in most cases, the horses then will start to have a more engaged back up where they actually use their hindquarter a little more. And they're not pushing down in the front because you made that unavailable. And then they'll start to back up a little bit. But you've got to do this slowly and incremental. You wouldn't want to, because a lot of horses, that's been a place for them to get away from pressure. So for the people who have had horses that have been really drilled in the mouth to drop their head, they can get a little frightened because that was the place that they thought they could go to release the pressure. But you're saying follow the feel up in a different way. So, it's a bit more intense for them. But in saying that, once they get it, they really appreciate it because they get loose and soft. And so then once you got the horse backing, you might get them to back up a little bit, and then you do it again, lift, and when they loosen, back up a little bit. And that'll get the feet looser and more lively. And you'll find if they let go of that brace in the base of the neck, they'll start to pick up at the knees a little more. And that's when they'll pick up and not drag so much. So that's sort of helping out the front end. And I believe before you do a hindquarter, you've got to lift the front end on a lot of horses because a lot of horses can bury their front when you do a hindquarter yield. So the other part of the backup that horses really struggle in, and like I just did an online lesson a while ago with a lady who wants to get a nice haunch turn on her horse, to play polocross, and the horse is leaking out through the hindquarter in the rollbacks and stuff. And one way would think, oh, well, I've just got to block the hindquarter from leaking. But the reason the mare's leaking in the hindquarter is because she's protecting it, because she doesn't know how to move a hindquarter correctly. And there's one side of her, more in particular, that she doesn't know how, and she lacks confidence, and she braces up in the back end. And so all she does is put all the weight on the forequarter and move the hindquarter around. But if you've got her balanced, she's still not confident enough on the back end to be loose. So she actually avoids the turn. So in a backup, that can happen too. A lot of horses do they do a 4-track backup where their hind feet are just crabbing out sideways, sort of dragging themselves along from side to side. And you sometimes feel their hips going in one direction, or sometimes it's moving from side to side because they're paddling and they're grabbing out wide. And that also hinders a good backup, that not being comfortable in the back end. So in that respect, once you've got that front lifted and the horse is loosening up a little, then I would start to do a backward step and then forward steps when the horse is lifting up in your hand. And then I would start to teach the horses to do hindquarter yields. And that way, when they're floating forward in your hand, you put a little bend in them, and then you roll the bend so the angle of the rein sort of will start to push towards the back of their wither. And that'll encourage them to rebalance out their hindquarter. And so once I've lifted them, I can go backwards and forwards, and then forwards and hindquarter yield, and do that on both sides. So then you can also do a forward hindquarter yield while the horse is elevated, and then you can start to turn that into a backup, and that'll get them picking up their hind feet a lot better, placing them underneath themselves a lot better, and not sort of, and because you do that a lot until they start to actually bring their hocks closer together. And once you've got, the brace of the neck sorted and the hindquarter working better, you've got more chances of the horse letting go of more of that brace and get more confidence. But as the biggest thing is the horse has got a strong thought. So sometimes when the horse has a strong thought forward and you're backing them, you have to firm up enough in your hand to say, let go of that thought, and then you loosen and let them catch up with themselves again. And the idea is that the horse is not leaning on anything. So when you do get your horse backing, they have to be backing, and not, the pressure's got to be so sort of, soft, not too heavy, because if it's heavy, then they've got to brace through their body, and that will cause them to, have a rhythm that's not a 2-beat rhythm, be all crooked in their feet. So once they can liven up, back up, and they're not backing off like a heavy pressure, to get them in rhythm, sometimes when you see them sort of fade a little in the front, you'll push up and back just a little firmer to let them catch up again, and then you'll slow down and follow them. When the horse fades out a bit, you push up and back again, and the horse will, and then you loosen a little, let the horse catch up with themselves, and you follow them. So it's not like you're driving them backwards, as in drive. You push in, and then you loosen and follow, and then after a while, as soon as you see them sort of fade out, they'll pick up again, and then within time, when they're thinking backwards, they're not got the brace in the base of the neck. You'll find that two-bit rhythm will start to sort of happen. And yeah, you have to kind of be able to do a slow, soft back up, but then also increase the strength of the back up, so they can put a bit more life in it and a bit more speed in it, and that also helps them wake up a little bit as well. But as I say, you don't want to be just driving them back fast when they're still heavy on their forehand and things like that. Otherwise, they just run backwards with a big brace. And, like I had a cutting horse at a clinic once that as soon as you pick up on the reins, it would run backwards 100 miles an hour, but it couldn't breathe when it backed up. It was so braced in its body, yet it could go fast in the back up, but it could not lift up in those reins, and its wither was dropping out in the back up. So it's so important to get those horses to softly lift and relax as they lift. And as I said at the start, they can't be asleep in the backup. Like for softness, I say so many times, people work on relaxation in their horses, and relaxation is good, but relaxation is not necessarily the key to softness, because the horse has to have a certain level of alertness and an awareness to become truly soft. So we have to have an alertness and awareness, and that comes from the lift in the horse and the awareness to get a good backup.
That's amazing. So you've just given us 10 minutes there of all this information. I'm not even going to go on to any other questions. I'm just going to leave this podcast on backing up, because it's enough in itself. So Ira, that answers your question, because you were wondering about how to pick up the front feet while your horse is backing up. I think Mark's addressed that there. So the main point is to make sure that you slow it down, and obviously get those horses' thoughts backwards. And if anyone's listening to this and sort of thinking, wow, I want to tackle some of the stuff that Mark's talking about, there is a whole section on backing up on his online training videos. You can try it for free for 7 days, and it is just $15 a month. So have a look at that. Give it a go. Anything else you want to add, Mark, just backing up in general? Any other tips? Or have you sort of covered what you wanted to say?
I've probably missed 10 tips, but the ones I've told you are probably close enough to help. But just quickly on that, as I was just doing some video editing this morning, there's a video that will be coming on in the next month's subscription, which will be this month actually, and it is a horse that's kind of really doughy and heavy, and it's just the first lesson of lifting. So I had a bit of it on Marvel last month, but he was already a slightly elevated horse. But this is more of a sort of a horse that stands heavy, and he's very quiet, and he stands on his forehand a lot. And it was just that lifting lesson slowly from a horse that is not familiar with it, and it shows how they start to loosen and liven up in the feet. So it's worth watching for to get an idea, and then you'll know where to go before you ask for more direction in whether it be forwards or backwards.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mark. That's really exciting to look forward to. We know you've got a virtual lesson that you've got to disappear off to do, so we'll let you go. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everybody.
You can learn more from Mark online through his online training videos. Just search Mark Langley Horsemanship. There's over 380 training videos which everyone has access to with a 7-day free trial. If you like what you see, it's just $15 a month from there. That's help where you need it.